Most people walk away from their prayer without realizing that the most powerful moment may have just begun, because the seconds immediately after Salah are not empty, ordinary seconds, but moments filled with opportunity, mercy, and nearness to Allah that many people unknowingly abandon. Every day, you stand before Allah, bow to Him, place your forehead on the ground, and speak to Him in Salah. Yet the moment you finish, the world rushes back in so quickly that you rarely pause to ask yourself whether the prayer truly ended or whether Allah has left a door open that you were never meant to rush past. What if those 45 seconds after Salah, the ones we usually spend standing up, checking our phones, or turning back to conversation, were among the most valuable seconds of your entire day, seconds that could quietly reshape your heart, erase sins, and build your place in Jannah without noise or effort. This reminder is not about adding something heavy to your life, and it is not about doing more than you can handle, but about recognizing the moment Allah already gave you and choosing to stay present in it just a little longer. Because sometimes it is not the prayer we neglect, but the ending of it. And sometimes the difference between a rushed Salah and a life-changing one is nothing more than 45 seconds of sincere remembrance. Stay with me, because these 7 lessons may change the way you end every prayer for the rest of your life. Salah is not the end. Many people believe that the prayer finishes the moment we turn our heads and say the salam. But in reality, that moment is not a conclusion at all. Rather, it is a transition from standing before Allah in Salah to remaining connected to Him through remembrance. When a person completes their prayer, their heart is still softened by humility, their soul is still present, and their focus has not yet been completely pulled back into the distractions of the world, which makes the moments immediately after Salah some of the most valuable moments a believer will experience throughout the day. However, this is also the moment that many of us rush through without realizing its importance, as we stand up quickly, reach for our phones, speak to those around us, or mentally move on to the next task, unknowingly turning away from a spiritual opening that Allah has placed right in front of us. What many people do not realize is that the time after Salah is a continuation of worship, because the prayer prepares the heart by cleansing it through humility and obedience, while Dhikr fills that heart by strengthening its connection to Allah and grounding it in awareness of Him. The righteous understood this reality deeply, which is why they would remain seated after prayer, not out of habit or delay, but because they knew that walking away too quickly meant walking away from a heart that was still closest to Allah and most ready to remember Him sincerely. In these moments, the dunya has not yet reclaimed your attention. The weight of sins has just been lightened, and the presence of angels still surrounds the place of prayer, making this time especially precious for remembrance, gratitude, and quiet reflection. When a believer chooses to sit for even 45 seconds after Salah and engage in Dhikr, they are choosing to honor the moment Allah has given them, to protect the softness of their heart, and to extend the spiritual light of the prayer rather than cutting it off abruptly. This is why Salah should never be treated as a task to complete and move on from, but as a sacred meeting whose effects are meant to continue, because sometimes the way a person ends their prayer reveals more about their relationship with Allah than the way they began it. 2. Small actions can lead to Jannah. Many people assume that reaching Jannah requires doing something extraordinary, something that feels heavy, difficult, or far beyond their ability. But Allah in His mercy has never made the path to Jannah dependent on strength, wealth, or perfection. In reality, Allah loves deeds that are small in appearance, yet consistent in practice, because these actions reflect sincerity, humility, and a heart that remains connected to Him throughout daily life, rather than only during rare moments of motivation. A dhikr that takes only 45 seconds may seem insignificant in the eyes of the world, but with Allah, it carries weight far beyond its size. Because reward is not measured by how long an action takes, but by the intention behind it and the consistency with which it is performed. This is why the simplest acts of worship, when repeated day after day, quietly build a person's Akhirah in ways they may never fully realize during their lifetime, as every sincere remembrance is recorded, preserved, and multiplied by Allah's generosity. Shaitan often tries to deceive believers by making them think that small deeds are not worth their effort, hoping they will wait for a time when they feel more motivated or capable, but that delay often leads to missed opportunities that could have brought immense reward. When a believer commits to a short dhikr after every Salah, they are proving to themselves that worship is not about dramatic effort, but about steady devotion, and that even in a busy life, there is always room to remember Allah. It is through these small, repeated moments of remembrance that Allah gradually lifts a person's rank, forgives their shortcomings, and draws them closer to Jannah, reminding us that the path to eternal success is often built through simple actions done with a sincere heart. 3. Consistency is more beloved to Allah than intensity. Many people begin their journey toward Allah with moments of intense motivation, promising themselves that they will change completely, worship more, and become better overnight. But as time passes and life becomes busy, that intensity fades, and they are left feeling disappointed in themselves for not maintaining the same level of effort. What Allah teaches us through His mercy is that He does not expect perfection or constant intensity, but rather sincerity expressed through consistency, because a small action done regularly reflects a heart that remembers Allah even when motivation is low and circumstances are difficult. A dhikr that takes only 45 seconds after each salah may feel simple, but when repeated after every prayer, day after day, week after week, and year after year, it becomes a powerful form of devotion that quietly shapes a person's relationship with Allah and anchors their faith in daily life. Consistency transforms worship from an occasional emotional experience into a stable habit, and habits are what sustain a believer when trials, fatigue, and distractions make it harder to feel spiritually strong, because when something is habitual, it continues even when emotions fluctuate. This is why Shaitan rarely tries to stop people from worship entirely, but instead focuses on breaking consistency by encouraging delays, excuses, and the belief that a small missed moment will not matter, even though it is through these repeated moments that faith is strengthened and preserved. Every time a believer sits after Salah and chooses to remember Allah, they are reinforcing a silent commitment, not only to the act of dhikr itself, but to a way of life in which Allah remains present beyond the prayer mat and into every part of their day. Over time, this consistency produces a deep inner transformation. As the heart becomes more aware of Allah, sins feel heavier to commit, gratitude becomes more natural, and patience during hardship grows stronger, without the person fully realizing how these changes developed. Unlike intense bursts of worship that often fade, consistent remembrance slowly reshapes the soul, building resilience, humility, and closeness to Allah, while preparing a believer to remain firm during moments of weakness, loss, or spiritual dryness. It is through these steady acts that Allah opens doors a person never expected, softens hardships in unseen ways, and grants blessings that are not always immediately visible, but are deeply felt in the heart and reflected in one's character. When a believer understands that consistency is not about doing more, but about doing what they can regularly, they stop feeling overwhelmed by worship and begin to experience it as a source of peace, stability, and hope. In the end, it is not the one who worships the most intensely for a short time who succeeds, but the one who continues to remember Allah faithfully, even in small ways, until they meet Him. 4. Dhikr purifies the heart and revives the soul. The human heart was not created to remain strong on its own, because it is constantly exposed to distractions, temptations, worries, and sins that slowly weigh it down, often without the person realizing when or how that heaviness began to settle in. Over time, the heart becomes tired, not always from major sins, but from constant exposure to the noise of the dunya, the pressure of responsibilities, the stress of survival, and the silent accumulation of mistakes that are rarely addressed but deeply felt, leaving a person feeling spiritually empty, even when they appear fine on the outside. This is why many people feel a sense of relief during Salah, because prayer momentarily lifts that weight by reconnecting the heart to its purpose. Yet that relief often fades quickly when remembrance is abandoned immediately afterward, and the heart is once again left vulnerable to the pull of the world. Dhikr serves as the continuation of that healing process, because remembrance cleanses what prayer has softened, gently washing away the dust that settles on the heart throughout the day, and restoring clarity where confusion and heaviness once existed. When a believer sits after Salah and engages in Dhikr, they are not simply repeating words, but allowing those words to slowly penetrate the heart, breaking down layers of neglect and replacing them with awareness, humility, and calmness that cannot be achieved through worldly distractions. With each act of remembrance, the heart becomes more sensitive to sin and more receptive to goodness, not through force or guilt, but through a natural shift that occurs when Allah is remembered consistently and sincerely. Many people search endlessly for peace through external means, hoping that success, relationships, or comfort will remove the unease they carry inside. Yet that emptiness remains, because the heart was never created to be fulfilled by anything other than the remembrance of its Creator. Dhikr addresses this emptiness at its source, because it reconnects the heart to the one who understands it completely, who knows its struggles, and who responds not only to words spoken aloud, but to intentions, regrets, and unspoken prayers hidden deep within. Over time, consistent remembrance after Salah reshapes the inner state of a believer. As anger becomes easier to control, patience becomes more natural, gratitude becomes more sincere, and reliance on Allah becomes stronger without conscious effort. This transformation does not happen suddenly or dramatically, but quietly, in moments that seem insignificant. Yet it is precisely this subtlety that makes Dhikr so powerful, because it changes a person from the inside before their actions ever change on the outside. As the heart becomes purified, worship begins to feel lighter rather than burdensome, because the resistance that once made remembrance feel difficult slowly fades, replaced by a longing to remain connected to Allah beyond obligatory acts. Dhikr also protects the heart from becoming hardened, which is one of the greatest dangers a believer can face, as a hardened heart becomes indifferent to reminders, unmoved by warnings, and disconnected from sincerity, even while performing acts of worship. Through remembrance, the heart stays alive, responsive, and humble, capable of feeling remorse for mistakes and hope in Allah's mercy at the same time, which is the balance that sustains faith throughout life's trials. When a believer understands that Dhikr is not an optional addition but a necessary nourishment for the heart, they begin to treat those moments after Salah with greater care, knowing that neglecting remembrance does not simply mean missing extra reward, but risking spiritual dryness and distance. In these moments of quiet remembrance, Allah replaces anxiety with tranquility, confusion with clarity, and heaviness with a sense of closeness that cannot be described, only felt by those who consistently return to Him. This is why even a short period of dhikr after every salah can transform a person's inner world, because while the action may be brief, its effect lingers throughout the day, influencing thoughts, choices, and reactions in ways that reflect a heart that has been revived. In the end, a purified heart is not one that never struggles, but one that always knows where to return for healing. And dhikr after Salah becomes that return, again and again, until the heart learns to find peace in remembering Allah above all else. 5. The tongue is the easiest path, yet the most neglected. Allah, in His wisdom and mercy, has made one of the greatest doors to reward also one of the easiest to enter, because He knows the weakness of human beings and understands that not everyone will always have the strength, time, or circumstances to perform acts of worship that require physical effort or long preparation. The tongue, small in size, yet immense in impact, has been given the ability to elevate a person to the highest levels of closeness to Allah, or to pull them into regret and loss, depending on how it is used, which is why remembrance through the tongue is among the most accessible and powerful forms of worship. Unlike many acts of worship, dhikr does not require special conditions, physical strength, wealth, or even privacy, because it can be done quietly, softly, and sincerely, making it a gift from Allah to every believer, regardless of their situation. Despite this ease, the tongue is often left idle after Salah, even though it has just participated in one of the greatest acts of worship, because the mind quickly shifts back to worldly concerns, while the opportunity for remembrance quietly slips away. What many people fail to realize is that Allah has intentionally placed dhikr on the tongue so that remembrance would never be out of reach, even for the tired, the distracted, the struggling, or the sinner who feels unworthy of more demanding forms of worship. Through simple words of remembrance spoken sincerely, a believer can accumulate immense reward, erase sins, and draw closer to Allah without exhaustion, demonstrating that worship is not meant to be a burden, but a means of connection and mercy. Shaitan understands the power of the tongue very well, which is why he works tirelessly to keep it busy with unnecessary speech, complaints, arguments, or silence, knowing that a tongue occupied with remembrance leaves little room for whispers and distractions. When a believer uses their tongue for dhikr after Salah, they are making a conscious choice to protect it from waste and redirect it toward its true purpose, transforming ordinary moments into acts of worship that carry lasting impact. Over time, consistent remembrance trains the tongue to become accustomed to mentioning Allah, making it easier to turn to dhikr during moments of stress, fear, or temptation, because what is practiced regularly becomes natural when it is needed most. This habit also creates a subtle form of discipline, as the believer becomes more aware of their speech throughout the day, choosing words more carefully and avoiding speech that may harm themselves or others, knowing that the same tongue used to remember Allah should not be used carelessly. Dhikr spoken after Salah carries a special weight because it comes at a moment when the heart is already inclined toward obedience, allowing the words to sink deeper and influence the believer's inner state more profoundly. Through this simple act, Allah teaches His servants that closeness to Him does not always require grand gestures or extraordinary effort, but sincerity expressed through ease and consistency. The believer who understands this no longer feels overwhelmed by worship, because they realize that even in moments of weakness, they still possess a powerful means of drawing near to Allah through their tongue. In this way, dhikr becomes a refuge rather than a responsibility, a comfort rather than a task, reminding the believer that Allah's mercy is always within reach, even when their energy is low and their heart feels heavy. By honoring the tongue with remembrance after Salah, a believer turns one of the simplest faculties into one of the strongest tools for spiritual growth, proving that sometimes the easiest path is also the most transformative. In the end, it is not the difficulty of an action that determines its value, but the sincerity with which it is performed, and the tongue, though small, carries the potential to lead a believer toward forgiveness, peace, and ultimately, Jannah. 6. Ending Salah with dhikr is a sign of true gratitude. Gratitude is not only something spoken, but something demonstrated through behavior, and one of the clearest ways a believer shows gratitude to Allah is by how they treat the moments immediately after being given the ability to stand before Him in prayer. Every Salah is a gift that many people take for granted. Because Allah did not owe us the time, health, focus, or opportunity to pray, yet He granted all of these blessings simultaneously and invited us into His presence, allowing us to speak to Him, ask from Him, and submit ourselves to Him. When a believer completes their prayer and immediately rushes away without remembrance, it is not always out of ingratitude, but often out of heedlessness. Yet that haste unintentionally reflects a heart that has not fully recognized the value of what it was just given. Ending Salah with Dhikr, however, transforms the prayer from a completed obligation into a cherished encounter, because the believer chooses to linger, acknowledging that standing before Allah was not something to rush through, but something to honor. Through remembrance, the believer silently expresses appreciation, recognizing that Allah guided them to prayer, accepted their effort despite shortcomings, and allowed them to complete an act of worship that countless people neglect or are unable to perform. This form of gratitude is powerful because it is not driven by words of thanks alone, but by the willingness to give time and attention to Allah after the formal structure of prayer has ended. In choosing to remain seated for dhikr, the believer prioritizes Allah over immediate distractions, showing that their connection to Him matters more than returning quickly to worldly concerns. Over time, this practice nurtures a heart that becomes more aware of blessings, not only in worship, but in daily life, as gratitude begins to shape how the believer views challenges, successes, and even delays as part of Allah's wisdom. Gratitude expressed through remembrance also invites increase, because Allah has promised to increase those who are thankful, not always through material gain, but through contentment, peace, and closeness that enrich a person's life in ways that cannot be measured. As this habit deepens, worship begins to feel less like a duty and more like a privilege, because the believer understands that being able to pray is itself a sign of Allah's care and guidance. Ending Salah with dhikr also protects the prayer from being treated as a checklist item, ensuring that it remains a meaningful interaction rather than a rushed routine. This mindset gradually reshapes the believer's relationship with worship as they begin to approach Salah with anticipation rather than obligation, knowing that each prayer is an opportunity to draw nearer to Allah and express gratitude through remembrance. In moments of hardship, this grateful heart becomes more resilient because it has learned to recognize Allah's presence even when circumstances are difficult, trusting that the one who grants the ability to pray is also the one who provides relief. Through consistent gratitude shown after every Salah, Allah softens the heart, strengthens faith, and anchors the believer in awareness of His mercy, making remembrance not an additional task, but a natural response to being given the gift of prayer. Ultimately, ending Salah with dhikr teaches the believer that gratitude is not confined to words or occasional reflection, but is lived through actions that honor Allah's gifts, especially the gift of standing before Him. In this way, those moments of remembrance become a silent declaration of appreciation, humility, and love for Allah, shaping a heart that recognizes prayer not as a burden, but as one of the greatest blessings of this life. 7. Jannah is built in quiet, daily moments. Many people imagine Jannah as something earned through a single extraordinary act, a dramatic transformation, or a level of righteousness they believe is far beyond their reach. Yet Allah, in His mercy, has designed the path to Jannah to be built gradually, through small, sincere moments repeated throughout a lifetime. Every day is filled with choices that appear insignificant, but when these choices are made with intention, they quietly shape a person's Akhirah, And among the most powerful of these moments are those that come immediately after Salah, when the heart is still inclined toward Allah. Jannah is not built all at once, nor is it built through moments that impress others, but through consistency in private acts of devotion that only Allah fully witnesses and records. When a believer sits after Salah for a brief period of dhikr, they are placing a brick in the foundation of their eternal home, even if they do not feel the weight of that action in the moment or see its immediate effect. Over time, these bricks accumulate, forming a structure that reflects patience, sincerity, and perseverance, qualities that Allah loves and rewards generously. What makes these moments so powerful is their privacy, because acts done when no one is watching are often the most sincere, and it is sincerity that elevates small deeds to immense reward. The dunya encourages speed, productivity, and visible results, but Allah values steadiness, intention, and quiet devotion, reminding believers that the most meaningful progress is often slow and unseen. By choosing to remember Allah after every salah, a believer is shaping their identity, becoming someone who prioritizes the Akhirah, even in moments when the world demands attention. This practice also prepares the heart for the ultimate meeting with Allah, because a heart that is accustomed to remembrance finds comfort in returning to Him rather than fear or hesitation. As the days pass, this habit strengthens the believer's awareness of accountability, reminding them that life is not merely a sequence of tasks to complete, but a journey toward an eternal destination. When difficulties arise, these moments of remembrance serve as anchors, grounding the believer in hope and trust, knowing that the same Allah who rewards their small acts will also be just and merciful in judging them. Jannah, then, becomes not a distant dream, but a destination actively worked toward, one quiet moment at a time, through choices that reflect faith and intention. This understanding transforms the way a believer views time, as even the shortest moments are recognized as opportunities to invest in the Akhirah. Through consistent dhikr after Salah, a believer learns that no moment spent remembering Allah is ever wasted, and that every sincere effort is preserved, multiplied, and rewarded beyond imagination. In the end, it is these quiet, faithful moments that define a person's journey, as Allah gathers them together and grants what the believer hoped for, even when they doubted their own worthiness. Jannah is not built through perfection, but through persistence, humility, and a heart that continues to return to Allah again and again. When a believer understands this, they no longer underestimate the power of 45 seconds, because they recognize that those moments are shaping their eternal future. And on the day when actions are weighed and the smallest deeds are brought forward, those moments of remembrance after Salah may be among the deeds that tip the scale, not because they were impressive, but because they were sincere. As you stand up from your next prayer, remember that Allah did not rush you out of His presence, and that the moment you choose to remain seated, even briefly, is a moment in which you are choosing the Akhirah over the dunya. You do not need to change your entire life overnight, and you do not need to carry the weight of perfection, because sometimes the most meaningful changes begin with the smallest decisions, like choosing to stay for 45 seconds and remember Allah with sincerity. If you ever feel distant, overwhelmed, or unsure of your path, let these moments after Salah become your return, a quiet place where your heart can breathe, your soul can heal, and your faith can grow without pressure or performance. Remember that Allah sees every effort, even the ones no one else notices, and that no second spent remembering Him is ever wasted or forgotten. As you move forward, let your prayer no longer be something you rush away from, but something you extend through remembrance, allowing its light to follow you beyond the prayer mat and into every part of your life. And if this reminder reached your heart, share it, because someone else may be walking away from the same moment you are now choosing to stay in. May Allah place barakah in your prayers, sincerity in your remembrance, and grant you and those you love a place in Jannat-ul-Firdaus. Amen.